I just want to take a few moments to talk about socialization process, a topic that's near and dear to both sociologists and psychologists' heart. Um, Sociologists um, define socialization as the process whereby a helpless infant becomes self-aware, knowledgeable person, skilled in the ways of the culture into which he or she is born. So it may be a little bit different than a psychologist might um, discover. There were several very high-profile cases of individuals who had not been socialized, including Jeannie, who was a feral child. I'll see if I can find some video information to put up on um, the Blackboard page as well. She was raised in isolation for the first 13 years of her life, severely neglected and severely emotionally and intellectually delayed. Um, the window of opportunity for her to become a socialized adult in her culture were way past. Um, so the interaction with humans is really important. That's why this is in the social interactions um, module. Some of the things that you might think about is, were there things different in how you and your siblings were raised, or in how she was raised? Um, what might happen if she was raised in just the opposite type of environment, perhaps one that's supportive and enriching? Some of the theories of child development are important, and some of these are more psychological than sociological. They include Piaget's theory of cognitive development, in which schemas are really brain mechanisms work through the process of accommodation and assimilation. Essentially, Piaget believed that children actually think differently than adults, which doesn't really surprise us today. This was the 1940s. And they go through certain developmental stages, including the first sensory motor phase, then pre-operational stage, concrete operation stage, and then formal operations. You can read about these in the textbook, or you can, if you've taken Introduction to Psychology, we talk about these also in human development as well. Freud focused less on cognitive development and more on psychosexual development. He believed that this thing called libido was like an unconscious energy that propelled humans through the lifespan. And they go through stages as well. These were all, by the way, called stage psychologists, including the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. In these stages, a person can become arrested, where they don't develop beyond that stage. And he believed, ironically, that development stopped at about age 16 or 17, which of course we know is probably not true. He emphasized the importance of parents, especially the mother, as agents of socialization. Sociologists have more to say about that later. This is especially important with respect to nursing a child, the toilet training, and the sexual development of an infant. Kohlberg was a contemporary of all of these people working in the early 1960s and 70s. He focused not on, he was a stage psychologist, but focused less on cognition and psychosexual and more on morality. He believed that the children's ability to reason things out between right and wrong was really important. And so he proposed his research, or based his research, on hypothetical moral dilemmas. Essentially, in a nutshell, the dilemma was that a child's mother realizes that she is very sick. She can't afford the treatment. The husband considers going back, or the father considers going back and stealing the medication. And depending on how the child reacted, they were in one of three stages. Pre-conventional, which is based on punishments and consequences. Conventional, which is based on right and wrong. That's where most kids are, especially when they're pretty concrete thinking. And post-conventional, where the child understands punishments and consequences, but also realizes that there's also larger standards in the world. They don't see the world as gray or black and white. They see it as gray. Carol Gilligan was a contemporary and actually colleague of um, Kohlberg, and she dissented from him because she believed that he was wrong. Instead of basing it on right and wrong, she believed that morality is based on what's just. Some of the baby psychologists were pretty notable during this time period. They dissented from the thinking of the time that children were just miniature adults. And some of the euphemisms that came out of this, including being seen and not heard, speak when spoken to, etc. And you need to treat them as grown-ups. You can't spoil a child. If you coddle them, you'll ruin them. Well, the baby psychologists didn't believe that to be true, and focused on the importance of nurturing and loving a child. And they included people like Harry Harlow and his famous rhesus monkeys at University of Wisconsin, Benjamin Spock, Mary Ainsworth, T. Berry Brazelton, fabulous baby psychologist, Fred Rogers, yes, Mr. Rogers, and someone maybe you've heard of Bruno Bettelheim. All these people focused on the importance of the parent-child interaction. But sociologists say something different. They see things through the lens of social groups. So of course, even child development can be combined with individuals within a group. George Herbert Mead says what's important to focus on is play. Mead thought that children went through 3 distinct stages of play, including independent play, where they play pretty much by themselves, parallel play, where they play next to somebody but don't interact, and then, of course, gaming. Through this process, they learn how to be a social actor, and they learn especially how to be me. They learn their own role, the roles of others. You maybe heard these terms called significant and generalized others. They learn how to play a game of t-ball or soccer by learning first what they have to do and then next what other people have to do. He coined these 2 terms I just mentioned, generalized and significant other. Significant others would be people like parents who have set specific values and morals in a person's child's life. And generalized others would be other people in the culture that are kind of the matrix of, and maybe even interact more in some ways than significant others do. Other sociologists describe socialization as occurring in more broad phases, and they call these agents of socialization, including the family, of course, schools, where a child spends most of their days, at least they typically do, peer relationships, yes, the media, including the internet and all the media outlets that children interact with. And unlike children, for adults it would be work. Other agents might include prison, for example. You might include the military. Anything that sets down new rules for how you interact with other people would be considered an agent. Even Alcoholics Anonymous might be. Keep in mind that we've been talking here about primary socialization in children, but this occurs throughout the lifespan. Probably the most prominent psychologist to talk about that was Erik Erikson, who said that unlike Freud, even though he was a classically trained analyst, he believed that human development occurred in 8 stages, right on through death, and it wasn't propelled by sex, but more about overcoming a psychosocial crisis. For example, a teenager understanding their own identity. That's a psychosocial crisis. And of course, here are the stages: infant, toddler, preschooler, school-age children, adolescent. And of course, Freud stopped about adolescence. And of course, Erikson went on to young, middle, and old age. As adults, we believe that we develop from cradle to grave, womb to tomb, birth to death. You should know what these issues are. So for example, for a teenager, it's learning about who they are versus uh, being confused about that. For a middle adult, where they go through a midlife crisis, do I generate or do I stagnate? For an old person, it's do I maintain integrity or do I get depressed? And you should be familiar with these. Maybe we can talk about them in a Zoom meeting. So agents of socialization for adult stages differ. So for young adults, it may be more peers. Um, for middle-aged people, it might be their friendships, especially with other families. And for older adults, it could be work. It could be the retirement community that they live in. Can you think of other ones? So I've listed a few here for young adults, work, college environment, and social situations, other couples, being part of a social community, and you might even add a social networking on here, media networking. For middle adults, it's changing, changing careers, continuing ed, changes in family status, for instance, your kids leaving home. For older adults, it's retirement activities, and agencies associated with aging and old age. And that's a quick review of the process of socialization.